The night was choking on smoke and screams. Flames roared through the old timber beams like hungry wolves devouring everything her father had left behind. Victoria Hale lunged straight into the inferno, her lungs burning, her dress tearing on splintered wood. In one trembling hand, she clutched a bundle of papers already curling black at the edges. "Father," she cried, voice cracking above the roar. "Father." She found him on the floor of his study, half crushed beneath a fallen bookcase, blood on his lips, eyes wide with terror and something worse. Regret. His fingers clawed at her sleeve as she dropped to her knees beside him. "Victoria, listen." His breath came in wet, broken gasps. "It wasn't suicide. They forced me. The debts, the lies. It was him, the Duke of Ravenmore. Silas Hawthorne. He destroyed us all." Those words sank into her like a blade. Then the ceiling groaned. A beam crashed down inches from her head. She screamed, shielding her father's body with her own, as sparks rained like hellfire. When she looked down again, his eyes had gone still. The fire took the rest. By the time the neighbors dragged her out coughing and sobbing, Victoria Hale was no longer the same woman who had walked into that house. She was 24, talented, penniless, and burning with a hatred so pure it felt like justice. For weeks after the funeral, London whispered the same lie poor Mr. Hale took his own life when the debts became too much. But Victoria knew the truth now. She had carried the scorched papers out with her letters ledgers, a single gold signet ring stamped with a Hawthorne crest. Every line pointed back to one man, Silas Hawthorne, the coldest, most powerful duke in England. She sat alone in her tiny rented room above a print shop, staring at the flickering candle until her eyes stung. The smell of smoke still clung to her hair. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's dying face. Every time she breathed, she tasted ash. How does a girl with nothing but a paintbrush and a broken heart destroy a duke? She would find a way. Victoria had always been good with faces. For the last 2 years, she had survived by painting miniature portraits for the wives and daughters of merchants who could not afford a real artist. Her hands were steady, her eye mercilessly accurate. People said she didn't just capture likenesses, she captured souls. Now she would use that gift as a weapon. The London season was about to begin. The grand houses would open their doors to artists, musicians, and anyone who could entertain the bored aristocracy. Victoria sold her mother's last pearl earrings to buy a decent gown and forged a letter of recommendation. She became Miss Victoria Hale portrait artist. When the invitation finally arrived, a crisp card requesting her presence at Ravenmore House to paint the Duke himself. Her hands shook so badly, she nearly dropped it. This was it. The moment she had prayed for and dreaded in equal measure. On the appointed evening, a sleek black carriage sent by the Duke's household collected her. Victoria sat inside back straight, clutching a small leather-bound notebook against her chest, like armor. Inside that notebook were every scrap of evidence she had gathered, every question she needed answered, every line of hatred she had written in the dark. The carriage rolled through the wrought iron gates of Ravenmore House. Gas lamps flickered along the long drive. The mansion rose before her like a sleeping beast, elegant, ancient, and terrifyingly beautiful. A butler led her through marble halls that echoed with every step. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure the footman could hear it. She told herself to stay calm, to remember why she had come, to picture her father's face one last time. They stopped before tall double doors. "His Grace will see you now, miss." The doors swung open, and there he was. Silas Hawthorne stood near the tall windows, one hand resting on the back of a velvet chair, the firelight painting sharp shadows across his face. tall, dark-haired, impossibly still. His eyes, a cold, piercing gray, lifted slowly and locked onto hers. For one breathless second, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Victoria felt it like a physical blow, the same flint-gray gaze her father had described in his final moments. The same man who had supposedly signed the papers that ruined her family. Yet something else flickered beneath that ice. Something tired, something guarded, something almost lonely. Her fingers tightened around the notebook until the leather creaked. Hatred surged through her veins, hot and sharp. But beneath it, uninvited and unwanted, came a strange, dangerous flutter. Because the Duke of Ravenmore was not simply a monster in human form. He was a man. And for the first time since the fire, Victoria Hale was afraid. Not of what he might do to her, but of what she might feel when she looked into those eyes again. The heavy oak doors of Ravenmore House closed behind her with a soft final click. Victoria stood in the grand portrait gallery the next morning, heart still racing from the night before. Sunlight poured through tall windows, catching on crystal chandeliers and turning the air to gold. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those flint-gray eyes watching her. Now she was here, inside the beast's den. She set up her easel with steady hands that betrayed none of the storm inside her. The Duke had agreed to 3 sittings, 3 chances to study him, 3 chances to find the proof she needed. Silas Hawthorne entered exactly on time. He moved like a man who owned every inch of the room without needing to claim it. Dark coat, perfectly tailored shoulders, straight expression unreadable. He took his seat in the high-backed chair without a word of greeting, only a slight nod. Victoria dipped her brush, forced her voice, calm. "Shall we begin, Your Grace?" He studied her for a long moment. Those gray eyes seemed to peel back layers she didn't want anyone to see. "You have interesting eyes, Miss Hale," he said quietly. "They don't flinch." She swallowed hard and lifted her brush. As the hours passed, she painted in silence. But her real work was elsewhere. While her hand captured the sharp line of his jaw and the shadows beneath his cheekbones, her mind catalogued every detail. The way his fingers tightened on the armrest when he was thinking, the faint crease between his brows that appeared whenever the butler mentioned his father's name. Lord Reginald Hawthorne. She had learned the name quickly. The old Duke lay upstairs in the East Wing, bedridden and fading, yet still pulling every string from his sick room. Servants whispered that he was demanding Silas marry Lady Eleanor Winthrop, a cold, ambitious heiress, whose family fortune could silence every scandal threatening the Hawthorne name. Silas never spoke of it. But Victoria saw the weight he carried, the exhaustion behind the perfect posture, the loneliness in a house full of servants and echoes. She hated how much she noticed. On the 3rd afternoon, while Silas was called away to meet with his solicitor, Victoria seized her chance. She slipped into the private library. The room smelled of old leather ink and faint cedar. Shelves reached to the ceiling. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she moved quickly, fingers tracing spines, opening drawers with careful silence. She found the ledgers tucked behind a false panel yellowed papers detailing land purchases forced sales families ruined overnight. Her own father's name was there. She read line after line until tears blurred the ink. Dozens of families, hundreds of lives crushed so the Hawthorne empire could grow richer. And Silas. His signature appeared on several documents. Young signatures, obedient ones. A floorboard creaked behind her. Victoria froze. She shoved the papers back, heart slamming against her ribs, and turned just as a maid passed the doorway carrying fresh linens. The girl didn't even glance inside. Victoria exhaled shakily, pressed a hand to her chest, and fled the room before her legs gave out. That evening, she met Clara Langley in a quiet tea room on the edge of Mayfair. Clara, her oldest friend, now a widow who took in sewing to survive, reached across the table and gripped Victoria's hand. "You're playing with fire." Vicky Clara whispered, eyes full of fear. "He's a duke. If he finds out who you really are, what you're searching for, he could destroy you with one word. Please, stop this before it's too late." Victoria stared into her tea, watching the steam curl like smoke from that terrible night. "I can't stop," she said softly. "Not yet. Not when every breath still tastes like ash." Clara sighed but said nothing more. She knew that look too well. 2 days later, rain lashed the windows of Ravenmore. Victoria had finished another sitting. The portrait was coming alive on canvas, Silas's face, captured with painful honesty. She had painted the exhaustion he tried to hide, the quiet strength, the man behind the mask. After he left the room, she wandered into the rose garden to clear her head. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle. She found a stone bench half hidden by climbing roses and sat down, pulling a crumpled letter from her pocket, one of the documents she had risked everything to copy. Her father's handwriting, his final desperate notes before the end. Tears came without warning. Hot, angry, helpless. She bent forward, shoulders shaking, trying to muffle the sobs against her sleeve. Footsteps approached on the wet gravel. She looked up sharply. Silas Hawthorne stood there, coat collar turned up against the rain-gray eyes fixed on her face. For once, the cold mask had slipped. He looked concerned. "You're crying," he said. "Not a question. Just quiet observation." Victoria wiped her cheeks quickly, horrified that he had seen her like this. "It's nothing, Your Grace. The rain." He stepped closer, not crowding her, just near enough that she could see the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes. "I know the look of real pain when I see it, Miss Hale." His voice dropped low and unexpectedly gentle. "Whatever burdens you don't have to carry them alone in my garden." Victoria's breath caught. In that moment, the man who had ruined her family wasn't a monster. He was simply a man standing in the rain, offering a kindness she didn't want to accept. Her hatred faltered, just for a heartbeat. And in its place bloomed something far more dangerous, a tiny, unwanted spark of understanding. She looked away, terrified of what he might see if she kept meeting those gray eyes. Because the longer she stayed in this house, the harder it became to remember why she had come. And the closer she came to losing herself completely. The storm hit Ravenmore House like an accusation that could no longer be silenced. Rain lashed the tall windows of the library, thunder rolling low and angry across the dark sky. Victoria stood alone among the towering shelves, a single lantern casting trembling shadows on the walls. Her hands shook as she held the final ledger she had risked everything to find. She had come back tonight after the household had gone to bed, driven by a need she couldn't name. One more search, one more truth, and she found it. The handwriting was unmistakable, Lord Reginald Hawthorne's bold, merciless strokes. Detailed instructions from years ago. Orders to manipulate land prices. Threats delivered through intermediaries. Cold calculations that had crushed not only her father, but dozens of others. Silas's name appeared too. But always as a young man, barely 20 signing documents under pressure, his signature hesitant, almost reluctant. A son following orders he didn't fully understand. Victoria's knees buckled. She sank into the nearest chair, the ledger slipping from her fingers onto the rug. All this time, she had painted Silas as the villain, the monster who destroyed her world. But the real monster had been lying upstairs the entire time, slowly dying, still pulling strings from his sickbed. Tears burned her eyes. The hatred she had carried like armor suddenly felt heavy, poisonous, wrong. A flash of lightning lit the room white for a split second. Then the door opened. Captain Marcus Reed stepped inside, shaking rain from his coat. Silas's old friend from the army, now a private investigator with sharp eyes and a quiet sense of honor. He had been staying at Ravenmore for 2 days, at Silas's request, quietly looking into old family matters. He froze when he saw Victoria on the floor, the open ledger beside her. "Miss Hale." His voice was low, careful. "What are you doing in here?" Victoria looked up, fear and defiance warring on her face. Before she could answer, another set of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Heavy, urgent. Silas Hawthorne appeared in the doorway, soaked from riding in the storm, dark hair plastered to his forehead. His gray eyes moved from Marcus to Victoria, then to the ledger lying open at her feet. The silence that followed was sharper than any thunder. "You're not just a portrait artist," Silas said slowly. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of betrayal. "Are you?" Victoria rose on unsteady legs. Her heart hammered so hard she could barely breathe. This was the moment she had planned for weeks. Yet now that it had arrived, every rehearsed word deserted her. She looked straight into those flint gray eyes that had haunted her since the fire. "Your father," she whispered, voice cracking. "It was never truly you. He used you. He destroyed my family, and so many others. You were just the pen he forced to sign." Silas stared at her. For the first time, the perfect mask shattered completely. Pain flooded his face, raw, unguarded, devastating. He took one step forward, then stopped as if the ground beneath him had shifted. "All these years," he murmured. "I thought I was protecting the family name. I thought—" His voice broke. Lightning cracked again, illuminating the anguish in his eyes. Victoria felt her own chest tighten. The hatred that had kept her strong was crumbling, leaving behind a hollow ache. She had come here for revenge. Instead, she was watching a man realize his entire life had been built on lies. Captain Marcus Reed cleared his throat gently. "I've been digging too," he said quietly. "The old Duke's schemes go deeper than any of us imagined." "Silas, you were barely more than a boy when most of this began." Silas turned away, bracing one hand against the mantelpiece. His shoulders trembled once, just once, before he forced them still. Victoria wanted to hate him. She needed to. But all she could see now was a man who had also been used. A son carrying sins that were never truly his. Later that night, after Marcus had left them alone, Victoria found Clara Langley waiting for her in the small sitting room downstairs. Clara took one look at her tear-streaked face and pulled her into a tight embrace. "I was wrong to push you so hard," Victoria whispered against her friend's shoulder. "But I was even more wrong to let hatred blind me." Clara smoothed Victoria's hair, her own voice heavy with old pain. "I know that feeling too well," she said softly. "Lord Reginald. He destroyed my husband's business years ago. Left us with nothing but debt and shame. I spent years wishing him dead. But hatred only chained me to him. Letting go? That's the only way to be free." Victoria pulled back, searching her friend's eyes. "Then what do I do now?" she asked, voice small. "I came here to ruin him. Instead, I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something I don't understand." Clara gave her a sad, knowing smile. "You choose, my dear. You can keep feeding the fire, or you can help put it out. Real justice isn't destruction. It's truth, even when the truth hurts. The storm continued to rage outside. Victoria stood at the window long after Clara had gone to bed. Rain streaked the glass like tears she could no longer cry. She thought of her father's dying face. She thought of Silas's shattered expression in the library. She thought of the long, dangerous road ahead if she chose to stay. Then, with a deep, trembling breath, she made her choice. Tomorrow she would tell Silas everything she knew. She would stay at Ravenmore. She would help him face the man who had poisoned both their lives, even if it cost her reputation, even if it cost her future, even if it cost her heart. Because some blades cut both ways. And sometimes the only way to heal was to turn the blade toward the real darkness. Victoria closed her eyes as another roll of thunder shook the house. She was no longer sure who the enemy was, but for the first time since the fire, she was no longer sure she wanted to destroy Silas Hawthorne. The days that followed the storm felt like walking on broken glass. Victoria and Silas moved through Ravenmore House like two shadows bound by the same secret. They spoke in hushed tones behind locked doors, stealing moments in the library after midnight or in the quiet of the portrait gallery when the servants had retired. No one could know. Not yet. Every morning, Victoria sat at her easel and painted Silas's portrait with trembling hands, while their real work happened in stolen glances and carefully folded notes passed between them. Together, they gathered fragments, old letters, hidden account books, witness statements Marcus Reed smuggled in under cover of night. Captain Marcus Reed returned one rain-soaked evening with a leather satchel heavy with truth. He placed it on the library table without ceremony. "These are from 15 years ago," he said quietly. "Your father didn't just ruin Victoria's family, Silas. He betrayed mine as well. And yours. The man you called friend in the regiment. He was ruined because Lord Reginald wanted his land for a railway scheme." Silas stared at the documents, his face pale in the lamplight. Victoria watched the color drain from his cheeks as the weight of years settled on his shoulders. He had spent his entire adult life trying to be the son his father demanded. Now he was learning that loyalty had been built on lies. That night, in the dim glow of a single candle, Silas finally broke. Victoria found him alone in the small study adjacent to his father's sick room. He sat with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent, wrenching sobs. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the deep, painful cries of a man who had carried betrayal in his blood for too long. She hesitated in the doorway, heart clenching. "Silas," she whispered. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed, tears tracking down his strong face. For the first time, there was no mask, no Duke. Only a son who had been used as a weapon by his own father. "I was 21 when I signed the papers that destroyed your family," he said, voice raw. "He told me it was necessary. That weakness would ruin us. And I believed him. God help me, I believed him." Victoria crossed the room slowly. She didn't touch him. She simply sat on the chair beside him and let him speak through the pain. Clara Langley became their quiet anchor in those fragile days. One afternoon in the rose garden, while Silas met with his solicitor, Clara took Victoria's hands in hers. "You've been carrying hatred like armor," Clara said gently. "I did the same after Lord Reginald destroyed my husband. It kept me alive. But it also kept me chained. Forgiving yourself for being blind isn't weakness, Victoria. It's the first step toward real freedom." Victoria looked down at their joined hands, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I wanted him to suffer," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I wanted the Duke to pay for my father's death. But now, every time I look at Silas, I see a man who was broken long before I ever walked through these gates. The blow came without warning 3 days later. Lord Reginald had discovered everything. A furious letter arrived delivered by a trembling footman. In it, the dying Duke disowned his only son. He ordered solicitors to strip Silas of every asset, every title, every penny tied to the Hawthorne name. Ravenmore House itself, the home that had stood for generations, was to be seized and sold to cover debts fabricated by the old man's final act of control. The news spread through the household like wildfire. Silas stood in the entrance hall, reading the letter, his face carved from stone. But Victoria saw the tremor in his hands. She saw the way his jaw tightened to stop it from shaking. That night, the house felt heavier than ever. Victoria found Silas in the portrait gallery, standing before the half-finished painting she had been working on. The room was dark, lit only by moonlight, streaming through the tall windows. He looked lost. When he heard her footsteps, he turned. Without a word, he crossed the distance between them and slowly lowered himself to one knee in front of her. Victoria's breath caught. He wasn't proposing. He wasn't begging for love. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, though his eyes glistened with unshed tears. If I lose everything tomorrow, the title, the house, the name, I only ask to keep one thing. He looked up at her gray eyes, raw with emotion. The truth you helped me see. The man I might still become. Because you refused to let me hide behind my father's lies. Victoria's heart fractured open. All the hatred she had carried since that burning night dissolved in the quiet space between them. In its place rose something deeper, warmer, and far more terrifying, a love that had grown silently amid the ashes of their shared pain. She reached out her fingers, brushing his cheek with a tenderness she hadn't known she still possessed. You won't lose everything, she whispered, voice thick with emotion. Not while I'm still standing beside you. Silas closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, as if drawing strength from the simple contact. Outside, the wind whispered through the gardens, carrying away the last remnants of the old storm. But inside Ravenmore House, a new fire had been kindled, fragile, uncertain, and impossibly bright. A fire built not from vengeance, but from two broken souls choosing truth over blood. And whatever came tomorrow, disinheritance, scandal, ruin, they would face it together. The grand ballroom of Ravenmore House blazed with 1,000 candles, but the light felt cold. Lord Reginald Hawthorne had insisted on one final spectacle. Even from his sickbed, carried downstairs on a gilded chair, the old Duke commanded the room. Tonight he would publicly disown his only son and force Silas to sign away every claim to the title, the estates, and the Hawthorne legacy. The cream of London society had gathered, whispers already spreading like poison through the glittering crowd. Ladies in silk and jewels, gentlemen in tailored black, all watching with hungry eyes. Victoria stood near the edge of the room, heart pounding so violently she could barely breathe. Her simple gown felt like armor and prison at the same time. Clara Langley squeezed her hand, once steady and warm. You don't have to do this, Clara whispered. Captain Marcus Reed stood a few steps away, his military bearing rigid with quiet support. Victoria looked across the ballroom at Silas. He stood tall beside his father's chair, face pale but composed, the weight of generations pressing down on his shoulders. Their eyes met for one brief, aching moment. In that look she saw everything, fear, resolve, and a silent question only she could answer. She had two choices: stay silent and protect herself, or step into the fire one last time. Victoria closed her eyes, remembering the burning house, her father's dying breath, and the tears on Silas's face in the dark gallery. Then she opened them again. This time, she chose truth. With trembling fingers, she picked up the small leather notebook and the stack of finished portraits she had secretly prepared. Each canvas showed not just faces, but souls, the haunted eyes of families destroyed by Lord Reginald's greed. She walked slowly to the center of the ballroom. The music faltered. Conversations died. Lord Reginald's sharp eyes narrowed as she approached. "What is the meaning of this?" he rasped, voice thin but venomous. Victoria's voice shook at first, but grew stronger with every word. "Your Grace, my lords and ladies, tonight you have come to witness a disowning. But before judgment is passed, you deserve to hear the full story." She opened the notebook. Her father's final words, written in a hand, weakened by pain, filled the silent room as she read them aloud. "They forced me to sign. Lord Reginald Hawthorne orchestrated the ruin of honest families so he could steal their land. My daughter Victoria must know the truth. Justice is not revenge. It is courage in the face of lies." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lord Reginald tried to rise from his chair, face twisted in fury, but his frail body betrayed him. He collapsed back, coughing violently, the color draining from his cheeks. Victoria didn't stop. She held up the portraits, one by one, faces of widows, orphaned children, ruined merchants. Each one a silent accusation painted with her own hands. "These are the people your greed destroyed," she said, voice clear now, steady with purpose. And Silas Hawthorne was only a tool, a young man manipulated by his own father. Silas stepped forward then. He looked at his father for a long moment, a lifetime of pain and conflicted love passing between them. Then he turned to the assembled guests. "I renounce any claim to the title until the truth is fully known," he said quietly, but every word carried. "I will not inherit a legacy built on suffering. If justice demands I lose everything, then so be it." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Lord Reginald slumped in his chair, eyes wide with disbelief and defeat. The man who had ruled through fear had finally been stripped of his power, not by violence, but by the simple, devastating weight of truth. Hours later, when the last carriage had rolled away and the candles had burned low, Victoria found Silas standing alone on the terrace overlooking the gardens. He turned as she approached moonlight, catching the quiet exhaustion on his face. "You were magnificent tonight," he whispered. She stepped closer until only inches remained between them. "I was terrified," she admitted softly. "But I couldn't let fear win again." Silas reached out, hesitating for only a heartbeat before gently taking her hands in his. Spring came gently the following year. Ravenmore House was no longer the cold, imposing fortress of a powerful duke. The heavy velvet drapes had been opened wide. Sunlight poured into rooms that once felt like tombs. The great halls now echoed with softer sounds, children's laughter, quiet conversations, the scratch of pens writing letters of support. Silas and Victoria had turned a part of the estate into a home for families who had once been ruined by Lord Reginald's schemes. A justice fund had been established, modest at first, then growing steadily to help those still fighting old debts and hidden injustices. One warm afternoon, Victoria stood with Silas in the rose garden. The roses were in full bloom, deep red, soft cream, and pale pink, their fragrance sweet and alive on the breeze. Silas's arm rested lightly around her waist as they walked the familiar paths. She stopped beneath an arch, heavy with flowers, and turned to face him. Looking into those gray eyes that had once terrified her, she saw only warmth now. Only home. We didn't win by destroying our enemy, she whispered, voice thick with emotion. We won by refusing to let him define us. Silas smiled a real unguarded smile that transformed his entire face. He leaned down and rested his forehead gently against hers. You brought light back into these walls, Victoria, he murmured. And into me. She closed her eyes, letting the scent of roses and the steady beat of his heart fill her senses. The fire that had once consumed her father's house had burned away the lies. What remained was something far more beautiful. Two scarred hearts choosing honesty, choosing courage, choosing each other. And in the quiet warmth of that spring afternoon, Ravenmore House finally felt like home. Not because of titles or power, but because love, real, honest, hard-won love, had healed what hatred never could. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for writing with us today. Aviso legal, barra disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories